Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma.
I'm Zara.
The federal government will introduce new laws to enforce minimum age requirements for social media users. Now, this announcement came just days after the South Australian government announced its own plans to move forward with a ban on social media use for under 14-year-olds. But there's a lot we still don't know about the federal government's proposal. How will it be rolled out and regulated? And above all, will it work? In today's deep dive, we'll take you through what we know about this announcement and we'll speak to an expert to find out if you can actually stop teens from using social media.
Should kids be banned from social media? Momentum around this conversation has been building for several months now, Em, and this week it's seemingly come to a head with a new promise from the federal government to introduce age limits on social media.
Social media has a social responsibility in order to have that social licence that they require to operate in a decent society. They're not above everyone else.
So the Prime Minister has committed to introducing legislation before the next election, which we know is due by May. But other than that, we don't have a lot of other detail. But one of the biggest questions that we keep hearing from our audience when it comes to social media age restrictions is, hey, this sounds good in theory, but how's it going to work?
Yeah.
And will it achieve anything in practice?
Yeah.
So to talk us through what this legislation might look like, how it might or might not work, and what needs to change, I'm speaking with Lisa Given. Lisa is a Professor of Information Sciences and Director of RMIT's Social Change Platform. Professor Lisa Given, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So the federal government has announced these plans to ban kids under 14 from social media, but we don't know exactly how that's going to work. It's a big concept. Can you break it down a little bit for us in terms of your expertise and what you know about how something like this might actually be achieved?
So generally what the government is asking social media companies to do is to make sure that when someone's coming along to set up an account, that they have reached a minimum age. That means that the companies are going to have to verify people's age, which could be done, for example, by having a parent attest to the fact that, yes, my child is 14 or older. Or it could be that they request, for example, government ID to be uploaded into the system so that they have proof of that age.
So what is the difference between that and the current lay of the land? You know, we have Facebook and Instagram, you tick a box. Technically, no, you're not supposed to be on those platforms if you are under 13, but we know the reality is very different. So how would this change that landscape?
Correct. So currently people have to tick a box, as you say. That means that, say, a 12-year-old could tick the box saying, yes, I'm 13 and get access to the system. That's not going to be good enough under this legislation. So what the government is saying is that social media companies will have to prove that they've taken all reasonable steps to make sure that someone is 14 or whatever age they impose. And so that's really where they're going to have some documented trail, some evidence. Otherwise, they could face fines, legislation, even court proceedings could happen.
How do we get the social media companies to play ball with this idea, though? We've seen that constant struggle between kind of governments and social media companies, not just here, but around the world. So how do the government compel those players to come to the table?
It's very challenging. We could actually see platforms that simply say, that's fine, we're not going to make our platform available in Australia to anyone. They could simply decide to pull up stakes and go home, as it were. If they do decide to continue in the market, then effectively the legislation is going to be a bit of a wait-and-see game.
I guess the big kind of question that hangs over these conversations is whether or not you can actually force teenagers not to participate in social media, whether or not you can tell an audience that's grown up with these kind of platforms that they are no longer allowed to participate. What are the potential fallouts that you see from that reaction within the community from more of a social perspective?
Absolutely. Well, even technically, there are ways to circumvent those controls. So someone could use a VPN or perhaps even simply going to an older sibling who has access to an account. So there would be ways or workarounds for children if they're motivated enough to stay online. And I think that's really the challenge here because there are many good things about being on social media. There are huge communities that children have kind of created, not only with friends that they know in person, but perhaps friends around the world. And there are a lot of reasons that they need to be there, looking for information, finding supports for, the daily struggles that they might have. So it's not simply a matter of saying, you can no longer do this and therefore they won't. Many people are going to find a way no matter what happens.
You mentioned earlier this concern around surveillance and privacy. How does age verification play into that? Why is banning children from social media potentially a privacy concern?
It really becomes an issue of what the mechanisms will be put in order to verify age. If there is a requirement that students or children or their parents have to upload data, a copy of a passport, for example, one has to wonder where will those data sit? We already have concerns about hackers and different organizations where our information has been made public inadvertently or because of bad actors. Here's another spot where that information then would be housed. So we would expect to see some, very tight data controls on the part of those social media companies, but it could raise other problems that we simply haven't anticipated.
Do you think that we're putting all our eggs in one basket here when there could be different approaches? Is age verification the answer to this issue, or are there other conversations that aren't being had about how we can restrict young people from social media?
Absolutely. I think for me, it's more about how do we stop harmful content at source. This is a really complex social issue. There's no doubt that there's harmful content online. How do we actually stop that? Not just to protect children, but to protect all of us, really. So for me, it's not about saying that we need to ban children and that they shouldn't be on these platforms. It's about how do we make sure that's a safe environment for them. At the same time, there could be, additional resources put into helping parents, helping teachers, other people around those children so that we can actually have conversations and appropriate training for children around how to navigate social media safely.
It's obviously an incredibly nuanced issue, as you've touched on. People seem to want to have a single entity to blame for the issue, or people want one entity to take responsibility, whether that's government, parents, social media platforms, or users themselves. Do you think that there's ever going to be a sufficient answer to that question? Who's responsible?
I think we all want a quick fix. That would be the ideal for this. But really, the more we dig into the issue, we see how complex it actually is. I don't think there is a quick fix here. This is really about battling social issues, bullying, misogyny. These are real issues that have been with us long before even the internet existed. How do we battle these? So it's in a way very positive that we're having these conversations around the harms that we face on a daily basis, but there is no quick fix.
Are we asking too much of parents with these models? The idea that, providing consent for your underage kid to join a platform, or that you have to be part of the age verification process. Do you think that places an unfair burden on parents who are already trying to manage what it's like having teenagers online?
I think many people may not realize the steps that may be involved in this type of a ban. And I think they might believe, oh, this is great. The government is doing this and they're going to manage the tech company. But in fact, the process could involve parents and could be very difficult to manage within the home, particularly if you've got kids of different ages. You might be concerned about where you might have to upload information to verify age or to consent to that. At the same time, it presumes that parents are going to have their children's best interests at heart. And we know some children need social media and the information it provides because they're not getting the support that they need in the home or in their communities.
Lisa, do you think that the bans are going to work?
I don't think the bans are going to work. I think that even if we bring them in and we jump through the hoops of age verification, etc., there will still be people who circumvent those rules. I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for here is a simple solution to a complex social problem.
Professor Lisa Given, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Daily Aus. It is a fascinating topic and one that I'm sure a lot of our listeners will care deeply about. If you enjoyed this episode and you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can hit follow and that will send a message to the platform that you are enjoying what we are making. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can hit subscribe and never miss another video. We'll be back again tomorrow, but until then, have a fabulous day.